Up next, viewers, we're getting some more visuals in Russia, in fact, where anti-war protests have taken place, where thousands of protesters, in fact, took to the streets in Russia and also to demonstrate against the Moscow's ongoing military offensive in Ukraine. And the fact that the protesters were unauthorized resulted in thousands of arrests as well from the Moscow law officials, and the protesters were hardly carrying any placards or banners, instead of chanting "No to war" and "Ukraine is not our enemy." Remember, viewers, we have seen such several sporadic protests that have broken out across Russia, especially in Moscow as well. And all of those protests, in fact, have resulted in arrests and detainment by the law enforcement agencies there on the ground. But you can see the kind of civilian sentiment there in Russia with respect to the invasion of Ukraine by the Russian troops on the ground. And you can see now thousands more, in fact, a protest that had broken out, thousands more have now been arrested. All of them have been taken into custody, even as there are several such protests that have broken out across Russia, specifically in Moscow, condemning the Russian aggression on the ground, condemning the President Vladimir Putin of his action of invasion into Ukraine. And the chants, in fact, are also a very telling sign of the sentiment of these civilians, where they are stating that Ukraine is not our enemy, and they are, in fact, also holding placards claiming "No to war" as well. And these are really the pictures that tell us the sentiment of the civilians that are there in Moscow, condemning their very own President Vladimir Putin's actions of aggression on the ground in Ukraine.
The latest protests coming across the cities in Ukraine. And remember, these protesters face also jail term, because in the past few days we had seen how Russian President Vladimir Putin signing into a law a bill introducing jail terms of up to 15 years for fake news about the Russian army, as he pushes forward with his agenda of invading Russia. And today being the 12th day, the visuals on your screen here, you can see the protesters, in fact, out there on the streets demanding "No to war," chanting slogans against the regime. They're chanting slogans for an end to the war here in Ukraine. So the massive support here for the Ukrainians from the heart of Moscow. Here we can see the visuals on your screens of thousands of protesters. Now, we have seen ever since the war began in the last few days, there has been overwhelming support, not just from Russia, but from across the world. We have seen many countries, people waving the flags, waving banners. And here we can see the cities are rising up. Cities in Russia are rising against the decision by Vladimir Putin, being contested here by his very own city. And the citizens are defying the law. The citizens are defying the diktat here. The citizens are coming onto the streets of Moscow and several other cities in Russia at this point of time, demanding an end to the war. They're going on chanting "No to war. Ukraine is not our enemy." We are seeing many protesters raising slogans there, shouting for an end to the war, an immediate end to the war. And that's what everybody is hoping for, because remember, today is day 12 of the war, day 12 of the Russian invasion in Ukraine. Visuals on your screens here, you can see the protesters lining up. However, there are not many placards this time. However, there is a united support here for Ukraine. You can see them hitting the streets, marching there, raising slogans there in support of the Ukrainians, going on chanting slogans there, saying "No to war. Ukraine is not our enemy." And we're looking at such protests spreading across Russia at this point of time. What started as a small protest in day 1, we're looking at a wide-scale protest on day 12. And it only goes to show the kind of support Ukraine is getting from the citizens of Russia at this point of time. Because remember, many of the world leaders called out against Putin's action, saying that, it's the Russians who are going to suffer from the sanctions that they do impose.
Well, as intense fighting has continued on the ground in Ukraine, we have seen how Republic, in fact, has the largest team of reporters on the ground, bringing you all the details of what is really happening in Ukraine.